At 70 years old, when most men are settling quietly into reflection, Kelsey Grammer stepped into a brand new beginning. In late October 2025, he welcomed his eighth child, a baby boy named Christopher, into a world he has spent decades navigating through triumphs, heartbreak, and reinvention. The moment Christopher arrived, held gently in his father's arms, it wasn't fame or career milestones that filled the room. It was tenderness, awe, and the unmistakable weight of a life lived in chapters. With children ranging in age from infant to 42, Grammer's family story spans generations, each child carrying a thread of the man he has been, and the man he continues to become. And yet what he confessed surprised everyone. Despite the complexity of his journey, despite the years marked by loss, success, and reinvention, his greatest happiness is profoundly simple. He said he feels most alive, most himself, when all his children are together in the same room, their voices overlapping, their presence reminding him of the life he fought so hard to build. It is in those gathered moments, not the spotlight, that he finds his truest joy. Kelsey Grammer's life began far from the bright lights that would eventually define him. His childhood was marked by uncertainty and emotional weight, experiences that would shape the man he became both on and off the screen. Long before audiences knew his name, he was a young boy learning how to move through a world that demanded resilience long before it offered comfort. These early years, shadowed by loss and upheaval, carved a quiet strength within him, the kind of strength that later allowed him to inhabit complex characters with honesty and depth. Every step he took into adulthood carried the memory of a past that tested him, yet also pushed him forward, urging him toward a future he could not yet imagine. As he found his way into the world of acting, there was an unmistakable sincerity in his presence. His early work on the stage was grounded in discipline, repetition, and the unwavering belief that storytelling mattered. When he stepped into the role that would change everything, Dr. Frasier Crane on the beloved series Cheers, he brought with him not just talent, but a lifetime of emotional experience. His voice, deeply resonant and instantly recognizable, was shaped by years of introspection. The character grew, deepened, and eventually took on a life of his own when Frasier received its own celebrated series. For 2 decades, Grammer's portrayal gave audiences laughter, comfort, and the sense of familiarity that only a rare performer can offer. Yet behind the applause and accolades, his life was defined by far more than success. His work became a refuge, a place where discipline offered structure and meaning. The roles he played carried echoes of his own past, moments of vulnerability, humor, longing, and growth. Through the long hours on set and the relentless pace of television, Grammer built a career that became one of the most enduring in American entertainment. But even as he navigated fame, he quietly held on to the lessons learned early in life, that family and connection were not luxuries but necessities. Fatherhood entered his story in stages, each child marking a new chapter in his emotional evolution. Long before he would become a father of 8, Grammer understood the profound responsibility that came with guiding another life. His early experiences with fatherhood were shaped by career demands, personal transitions, and the challenges that came with constant movement. But through every shift, through relocations, new roles, marriages, and reinvention, his dedication to his children remained one of the grounding forces in his life. As the years unfolded, he continued to grow not only as an actor, but as a man learning to reconcile his demanding profession with the quieter, more intimate work of parenting. His reflections on fatherhood carried the weight of wisdom earned through experience, through the recognition that time is both fleeting and precious. And while his career placed him in front of millions, his truest moments of purpose came from the connections built at home. By the time he approached his 70s, Grammer's life had stretched across decades of storytelling, personal transformation, and emotional reckoning. The lessons of his early years, the discipline of his career, and the responsibilities of fatherhood all converged to shape a man deeply aware of the fragility and beauty of life. It was this foundation, built from hardship, triumph, and unwavering determination, that prepared him for the moment that would surprise the world, welcoming another child into his life at 70. Long before Christopher arrived, the path toward that joyful beginning had been quietly forming, built on years of growth, healing, and rediscovery. Across the wide landscape of Kelsey Grammer's life, fatherhood did not begin as a calm, steady road. Long before the soft glow of late-life peace, he was a young man trying to step forward while carrying the invisible weight of grief, responsibility, and the demands of a rising career. His first 4 children, Spencer, Greer, Mason, and Jude, came into his world during years defined by extraordinary professional triumphs and deeply personal losses. It was a time marked by constant motion, long working hours, and the kind of emotional turbulence that only later becomes fully understood. Yet even then, even in the years when stability was harder to hold on to, Grammer's love for his children remained a private thread running through every setback and every moment of rising fame. His eldest daughter, Spencer, arrived when his career was still forming, when his days were unpredictable, and the pressures of earning a place in Hollywood pulled him in 10 different directions. As his work grew, so did the demands placed on him, and maintaining a consistent presence became more challenging than he ever anticipated. His daughter Greer entered his life during the height of his television success, at a time when the public saw a man at the top of his field, unaware of the emotional cost behind the scenes. Mason and Jude followed in the years that unfolded next, each child bringing a new reminder of the connection he longed for and the commitment he wished he could nurture more fully. By his own reflection in later years, Grammer knew that those early chapters of fatherhood were complicated, not for lack of love, but because he had not yet reached a place within himself where he could be the steady presence he is now. The emotional storms of his 20s and 30s shaped him more deeply than most people realized. Losses in his family, ongoing struggles with identity and healing, and the intensity of early fame all played their part. These facts didn't excuse the distance he sometimes felt from his children. Rather, they explained the inner landscape he was trying to navigate at the time. Still, the foundation of love was always there. What changed over time was Grammer himself. He grew older, more grounded, more conscious of the moments that cannot be returned once they pass. These were the seeds of the man who would later cherish fatherhood with breathtaking devotion. The man who would openly share that the happiest he ever feels is when all his children, now 8 of them, are gathered in one room. That joy, born from years of learning and self-reflection, has become one of the clearest truths of his life. The turning point came quietly, not through a single event but through a gradual maturing, a deepening of perspective. By the time he welcomed children with his wife Kate years later, Faith, Gabriel, James, and eventually baby Christopher, he had become a man who no longer ran from the emotional work required of a parent. Instead, he leaned into it with tenderness, attentiveness, and gratitude. The contrast between his early years of fatherhood and the man he would ultimately become is not a contradiction. It is a story of growth, healing, and the rediscovered ability to give fully. When Kelsey Grammer met Katie Walsh, his life was standing at a crossroads few could fully see from the outside. His career remained strong. His public image was familiar to millions, yet there was a quiet ache beneath the surface. An ache formed by decades of loss, fractured relationships, and the lingering sense that he had lived more years searching for peace than actually holding it. Katie entered his life not as a dramatic turning point, but as a steadying presence, someone whose calm spirit and grounded nature stood in gentle contrast to the chaos he had carried for so long. Their relationship unfolded not as a whirlwind, but as a gradual healing closeness that helped reshape the rhythms of his daily life. Their marriage marked the beginning of a new chapter, one defined less by the demands of fame and more by the intimacy of building a home where softness could finally take root. It was within this chapter that Grammer embraced a renewed sense of purpose, slowly replacing emotional distance with genuine presence, and trading old patterns of restlessness for the deeper satisfaction of showing up with intention. and as their family began to grow, that transformation became unmistakable. Their first child together, Faith, arrived at a time when Grammer felt more grounded than he had in years. The experience of welcoming her into the world carried a sense of gratitude that he spoke of openly, recognizing how different fatherhood felt when approached from a place of stability rather than survival. Gabriel and James followed, deepening the rhythm of their home and strengthening the quiet, everyday joys that come from raising children without the storm clouds that once overshadowed his life. These early years with Katie became a period of emotional rebuilding, years where Grammer learned not only how to be a consistent father, but how to recognize the comfort of a life anchored in love, routine, and trust. But the most unexpected blessing arrived when Grammer was 70 years old, the birth of their youngest son, Christopher. Welcoming a newborn at an age when many men are contemplating retirement brought a tenderness that surprised him, even after a lifetime of emotional highs and lows. Christopher became more than just a new baby in the family. He became a gentle reminder that life still had new beginnings to offer, even after decades that had taken him through every imaginable chapter. Holding this tiny child, Grammer often spoke about the profound sense of renewal he felt, embracing fatherhood with a softness that comes only from experience, reflection, and years of growth. The world saw the headlines, an actor becoming a father again at 70. But what mattered to Grammer was not the novelty of the moment. What mattered was the chance to do it all with intention. With Katie by his side, these years became his most consistent period of hands-on parenting. He savored small details that earlier versions of himself might have missed: the quiet mornings, the shared routines, the comfort of knowing that his children felt safe, loved, and supported in ways he once struggled to provide. Their household grew not only in number, but in emotional richness. Grammer often reflected on the serenity he felt within their home, describing how fulfilling it was to watch his children grow in an environment defined by stability rather than the instability that characterized so many of his earlier decades. These were the years when he quietly rebuilt not just his sense of self, but his relationship with fatherhood. No longer fragmented, no longer overshadowed by fame or inner turmoil, but whole, present, and deeply felt. Kelsey Grammer's public story has always been framed by extraordinary success, the kind that spans decades, crosses generations, and cements an actor as a permanent figure in the cultural landscape. But behind the accolades and iconic roles was a private life marked by losses so profound that they shaped the very core of who he became. These losses were not passing moments. They left emotional fractures that followed him through every chapter of his adulthood. His father was murdered when Grammer was still young, a tragedy that cast a long shadow over his early understanding of safety and stability. Years later, he endured the pain of losing his sister, a loss so devastating that it carved a permanent ache into his heart. These wounds did not simply fade with time. They traveled with him, shaping his decisions, his relationships, and the quiet places inside him that he rarely allowed the world to see. Fame gave him opportunity, but it also magnified every stress, every heartbreak, and every moment of vulnerability. The world saw the polished performer, the commanding voice, the poised elegance of a man who seemed endlessly capable. But privately, Grammer often struggled to reconcile his public image with the grief and instability that had defined so many of his early years. His personal life, especially in marriages that ultimately came to an end, reflected a restlessness that had roots far deeper than the public ever knew. His journey through 3 divorces was not a path of scandal or spectacle. It was the story of a man still learning how to be present, still searching for a sense of emotional safety that had been disrupted long before adulthood arrived. Amid this complicated emotional landscape, fatherhood remained one of the only places where Grammer consistently found meaning. But even then, his early years as a parent were often interrupted by work demands, personal turmoil, and the lingering effects of the losses he carried. He has spoken candidly about wishing he had been able to give more time to his older children when they were young. acknowledging that the weight of his past sometimes made it difficult to show up with the consistency every child deserves. Yet even within those struggles, he cherished his connection to them, understanding that the bond he shared with each of his 8 children, those born decades apart, raised in different seasons of his life, was a source of grounding. What makes his later years especially poignant is the way Grammer actively worked to break the emotional patterns that once felt inevitable. His renewed commitment to fatherhood, especially after finding stability in his life with Katie, allowed him to confront the wounds that had shaped him for so long. Instead of allowing grief to keep him distant, he began to meet it with reflection, integrating therapy, faith, and honest self-examination into his daily life. These were not dramatic reinventions. They were quiet, intentional shifts, the kind that gradually transformed his relationship with himself and with the people he loved most. This emotional evolution became especially visible in the way he spoke about his children. He often mentioned how their presence brought a sense of healing that decades in the spotlight never could. The simple act of hearing their voices in the same room, watching them interact, or sharing a meal together became moments of profound comfort. For Grammer, these family gatherings were not just joyful experiences, they were restorative ones. They reminded him that despite every hardship, every loss, and every chapter defined by struggle, he had built a family that continued to grow in strength and connection. In these later chapters of his life, Grammer did not seek perfection. He sought peace, the kind that comes from embracing both the sorrow and the beauty of a life fully lived. By the time Christopher arrived in late October 2025, Kelsey Grammer had lived more life than most people could ever imagine. He had survived heartbreaks that would have broken others, risen to a level of fame that reshaped television history, and rebuilt himself again and again through the defining moments of fatherhood. Yet nothing prepared him for the emotional depth of becoming a father once more at the age of 70. When he held his newborn son for the first time, there was no sense of disbelief or hesitation, only a quiet, overflowing gratitude that softened the edges of every hardship he had carried for decades. Christopher's tiny heartbeat against his chest brought a tenderness that felt both familiar and entirely new. Grammer had welcomed children throughout different eras of his life, but this experience felt like a gentle reminder that time does not close doors as firmly as people often fear. Instead, it offered him a final chapter of fatherhood, defined by presence, steadiness, and emotional clarity. With Katie by his side, the arrival of their 4th child together, joining Faith, Gabriel, and James, formed a complete circle around the family they had spent years nurturing with intention and care. What surprised many people was not simply that he had become a father again at 70, but what he openly confessed afterward. In a lifetime filled with achievements, awards, and unforgettable roles, Grammer said that his truest joy did not come from the spotlight or the applause. It came from his 8 children, with ages ranging from a newborn in his arms to his oldest, who was already in their early 40s. His family formed a wide, interwoven tapestry of personalities, eras, and memories. And through all the challenges of his personal past, he found the deepest meaning in the moments when they were all together. He expressed that his happiest times were when every one of his children, those born before Katie, and the 4 they share, filled the same room, their voices mingling into a kind of harmony only family can create. That feeling, he explained, was a privilege made possible by the life he had worked for over many years. It was not fame that allowed him to experience it, but the stability he finally built in his later years, the emotional grounding that made these gatherings feel both healing and complete. Christopher's birth only strengthened that sense of wholeness. Grammer approached fatherhood in this stage of life with a gentleness shaped by age, experience, and reflection. He cherished the quiet, everyday details, the soft sighs of a newborn sleeping on his shoulder, the small routines that filled the early mornings, the joy on the faces of his older children as they welcomed their baby brother. These were the moments he now understood as the true rewards of a life lived in pursuit of connection. And as he embraced this new chapter, Grammer did so with a renewed sense of purpose. He spoke openly about wishing he had been able to give more time to his older children during the earlier years of his career, acknowledging the weight of long working hours and the emotional burdens of a life marked by loss. But what defined him now was not regret, it was intention. He knew that each day with his children, especially with Christopher, was a gift to be met with presence rather than distraction. In the end, Kelsey Grammer's story is not defined by fame, nor by the shadows that once followed him through the years, but by the quiet truth he came to understand late in life. Fatherhood, in all its complexity and tenderness, became the place where he found his deepest sense of purpose. Welcoming his 8th child, Christopher, at the age of 70, was more than a surprising headline. It was the continuation of a journey shaped by resilience, love, and the steady healing that family can bring. Surrounded by children whose ages span more than 4 decades, Grammer discovered that joy does not diminish with time. It grows fuller, richer, warmer. And when he spoke about the moments that meant the most to him, it wasn't the awards, the applause, or the iconic roles. It was the image of all his children gathered in the same room, sharing space, sharing laughter, and reminding him of the life he worked so hard to rebuild. For him, that is the truest success, the one that fills his heart long after the lights fade. For more emotional stories, check out this video.